The storm rolled across the frontier plains like a warning from the old spirits, a low growl of thunder shaking the walls of Emma Harlan's lonely cabin as she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying to ignore the ache of the past 2 years, her husband gone to the dust, her small homestead surviving only because she refused to let grief hollow her out. She was chopping wood when she heard the thud, soft, heavy wrong like a full-grown man collapsing. With her rifle raised, she stepped inside and froze. On her cabin floor lay an Apache raider, tall, broad-shouldered, bleeding from a musket wound to the ribs, breath shallow, eyes burning like dark embers even in weakness. Emma's heart slammed against her ribs. Every settler tale warned her of raiders, silent, ruthless, deadly, but she couldn't ignore the blood-staining, her floor or the way his hand trembled as if he'd crawled miles to escape death. "Get out," she whispered, though her voice shook more in fear than command. But he didn't move. He couldn't. Despite fear twisting her stomach, something older than fear pulled at her. Duty, compassion, the memory of her husband's last breath when she couldn't save him. She knelt beside the warrior, her fingers brushing his fever-hot skin. He opened his eyes, and in a voice rough as gravel, he said a single word, "Please." That one word, spoken by a man raised never to beg, shattered the distance between enemy and human. Emma cleaned the wound, stitched it despite his low growls of pain, and sat awake the whole night watching him breathe. Days passed. He healed slowly, silently, his dark eyes tracking her every movement, studying her courage, her stubbornness, her loneliness. She learned his name, Taza, son of a respected Apache chief. Betrayed by his own scout and left to die, he never thanked her, but he never tried to hurt her either. Instead, he fixed her broken saddle, chopped her firewood, and stood guard outside the cabin at night as if he owed her a life debt. But the frontier had hungry eyes. Neighbors noticed footprints, whispers spread, and one cold dawn, the local marshal thundered onto her property with 6 armed men. They shoved open her door and found Taza standing there, alive, strong now, a living threat in their eyes. "You harbor a raider, widow," the marshal barked. "That's a hanging offense." Emma tried to step in front of Taza, but a soldier yanked her aside, guns aimed at his chest. Taza looked strangely calm, accepting death like a warrior born to it, until Emma shouted, "Stop!" He was wounded, half dead. "I saved him!" But the marshal didn't care. To him, mercy was treason. The men dragged Taza outside, ready to end him right there. When the tribal envoy arrived, Apache riders cresting the ridge, like shadows returning home. Their chief dismounted, gaze sharp, taking in the scene with ancient, unforgiving judgment. "Your laws say a widow alone can't harbor a man without marriage," the chief said coldly. "Our laws say whoever saves a warrior becomes bound to him by fate." The marshal hesitated, suddenly outnumbered and outmatched by Apache authority. The chief stepped closer to Emma, voice low, resonating like thunder. "You saved him. That makes you responsible for him. In Apache law, you belong to each other now." Emma's breath caught. Taza's jaw clenched, and before she could speak, before she could breathe, before she could protest, fate sealed itself around her. "She will marry him," the chief declared, "by blood debt, by honor, by the law of the people." And just like that, Emma Harlan, widow, settler, loner, was no longer merely the woman who saved an Apache raider. She was forced by ancient law and frontier politics into becoming his promised wife. As the marshal rode away with frustration burning in his eyes, and the Apache warriors formed a protective circle around her cabin, Emma realized her entire world had changed. Taza stared at her with an unreadable expression, part gratitude, part regret, part something deeper and dangerous that she could not yet name. And as dusk fell across the plains, she knew one truth with startling clarity. Saving him was only the beginning of a story far bigger, far wilder, and far more perilous than anything she had ever imagined. Emma had never imagined her life could shift so violently. One moment a lonely widow living off the land, the next bound by Apache accustomed to a man whose presence felt like a storm contained within human skin. Taza walked beside her through the long trail leading to his people's camp. The sunset painting, the cliffs red like war paint. He kept his distance, but never strayed far, watching her with the solemn protectiveness of someone who had accepted a destiny neither asked for. When they reached the camp, hundreds of eyes fell upon her, some curious, some suspicious, some openly hostile. The women whispered sharply, the older warriors tightened their grips on their spears, and children hid behind their mothers' skirts. A settler woman among Apaches, married by law to a raider? It was madness. But the chief raised his hand, and silence fell like a blanket. "She saved my son," he declared to the tribe. The spirits saw it. Her courage binds them. Taza stood stiffly, jaw working as if he despised the situation but honored the tradition. Emma's cheeks flushed as the chief pushed them forward into the sacred circle where marriages were blessed. She wanted to scream that she hadn't agreed, that she didn't belong here. But the words lodged in her throat as she saw the way the chief's eyes softened, not in prejudice but in wisdom. He wasn't punishing her. He was protecting both her and his son from the politics of two colliding worlds. That night, the ceremony flames crackled beneath a sky full of unblinking stars. Emma and Taza tied the ceremonial cord between their wrists, sealing their forced union. But when the drums faded and the tribe dispersed, Taza turned to her with quiet intensity. "You are not my prisoner," he said. "I will protect you, but I will not claim what you do not offer." It was the first time his voice sounded human, almost gentle. Days passed. Emma learned to grind maize, weave baskets, speak bits of Apache tongue. Some women began to warm to her, especially when she healed a child with herbs she learned from her late husband. Taza watched her slowly find footing among his people, something like reluctant admiration glinting in his eyes. Nights were the hardest, sharing a lodge with him but separated by distance. Silence heavy but not hostile. One night she woke to the sound of him gasping, trapped in a nightmare of betrayal. Instinctively, she reached for him. His breath steadied beneath her touch, and he looked at her with raw vulnerability she had never seen in a man. From that moment, their distance began to crumble. But peace never lasted long on the frontier. One morning, a scout thundered into camp. Settler militia were coming, claiming Emma had been kidnapped and demanding her return. The tribe prepared for war. Emma stood before Taza, heart pounding. "This is my fight too," she said. "If they come for me, they'll kill you first." Taza shook his head fiercely. "I would die before I lose you." The words hung between them, honest, unguarded, impossible to deny. When the militia attacked at dawn, the valley erupted in gunfire. Taza fought like a spirit of the wind, swift, lethal, unstoppable. Emma refused to cower. She loaded rifles, warned warriors of flanking attacks, dragged wounded children to safety. Amid the chaos, the marshal, furious, red-faced, pride wounded, charged straight for her with a rifle raised. Taza saw him first and threw himself between them, taking the bullet meant for his wife. Emma screamed as he collapsed into her arms, blood staining his chest. Rage surged through her like fire. She grabbed the fallen rifle and fired back with deadly precision, forcing the militia to retreat. The chief declared victory, but Emma didn't care. She only cared about the man bleeding in her lap. She refused to let him die, not after saving him once, not after everything they had endured. She tore her dress, pressed cloth to his wound, whispered to him desperately, begging him to stay. Taza cupped her cheek weakly, eyes soft with something far deeper than gratitude. "You saved me again," he murmured. "Maybe this is fate." He survived, and when he woke days later, Emma was still beside him, holding his hand as if she had always belonged there. The tribe celebrated them not as forced spouses, not as a charity case of two worlds colliding, but as a union forged in fire, loyalty and chosen devotion. As Taza pulled her close beneath the rising dawn and whispered, "Wife," she felt no weight in the word, only truth, fierce and undeniable. They had begun as strangers, bound by law, trapped by circumstance. But they had become something stronger than fate itself.